What's up guys, and welcome to another Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be tackling this render. It's not too hard to make and I'm going to show you exactly how it's done. And if you want to follow more of my work, you can find me on Instagram, that's @nedmotion. You can also find more of my work on my website, that's nedmotion.co.uk. I release 3 designs every week with the Blender project files included. So if you like what you see, you can play around with them yourself. And if you find value in my work, consider supporting me on Pateron, where you have instant access to all Blender project files, including this tutorial file. Right, on with the tutorial. So first thing I'm going to do is delete that default cube. So hit X, delete. Going to hit Shift A, add a mesh, and we're going to add a cylinder. We're going to go to the properties here, and we're going to change the number of vertices to 6. So we get a hexagon shape. I want you to go into edit mode, so hit tab, and I want you to hit A, so you select all of the vertices within the object, and hit RX 90, so we face it down the y-axis. Go to your face select here, and we're going to delete the face here, and we're going to delete this face here as well. So we have a nice sort of tunnel to work with. Now I'm going to hit A again while I'm still in edit mode. So we're selecting all the faces, and I'm going to hit S and then Shift Y. So what Shift Y will do, it will lock the scaling onto every axis that isn't basically Y. So that way I can scale along the X and the Z axis. So I'll do that again, S, Shift Y, and then I'm going to scale that up by 4 meters. And now I'm going to hit A again, G, Y, 1, just so my origin point falls perfectly on the start of the tunnel. That way, now when I scale everything, it's going to scale. If I come out of edit mode now, if I hit S and then Y, it's going to scale like that. So the bottom basically stays in the same place. So now I'm going to hit S, Y, 64. It's going to be a nice long one. Hit 7 just to go into top view. I'm going to bring this up, and I'll go back into edit mode again. I'm going to go to loop cut here, change the number of cuts to 6, and we're going to add a loop cut just here, and that's going to add 6 automatically because we set that number of cuts. I'm just going to position the camera now, so click on the camera, hit Alt G to reset the location, Alt R to reset the rotation. I'm going to hit RX 90. That's going to face the camera down the tunnel. Let's just do a quick animation of the camera passing through. So I'll hit 7, so I'll go into top view, just get the whole tunnel within the view, and we're going to drag this up a bit. I'm going to go to my output properties, the scene settings, sorry, and I'm going to change the frame rate to 30 frames per second. The ones I rendered at were at 60 frames per second, but just because it's a tutorial, I just want to do it quickly, so I'll set it to 30, and we'll set the end frame to 300. So we've got a 10-second loop, obviously 10 times 30 is 300. So, and now click on your camera. We're just going to do a really simple animation of this going through the tunnel. So on your first frame, add a keyframe on the y-axis. So we're going to add a keyframe on the camera, on the y-axis, on the first frame. With my mouse hovering within the timeline, I'm going to hold shift and then right arrow to jump to the last frame. And I'm going to hit right arrow again just to go to 301. Change that to 128. With your mouse hovered in the timeline, hit A to change the interpolation to linear so that the camera just constantly moves rather than accelerates and decelerates. If you want a constant animation, it's best to set it to linear. With that set, you can just hit 0 and see the camera passing through now. Oh yeah, for those of you who are new to creating looping animations, the reason why we set it to 301 rather than 300 is because if you set it to 300, it's going to render out a duplicate frame. So you're basically going to render the first frame twice. So when you try loop it, it's going to appear like it's sort of stuttering. So you want to make sure that you give yourself an extra keyframe if you're intending the animation to loop. Let's just extend the tunnel. So I always like to instance when I extend the tunnel. The reason why is because it's a lot easier on your computer's resources, and also it gives you more control. The way to do that is to click on your cylinder, hit M on your keyboard, add a new collection. We'll call this tunnel. Now that you've moved that to this new collection, you can hit Shift A, add a collection instance, add the one that you just created, and it's gonna basically now add sort of a ghost copy of the object that you just made. So now we're gonna hit GY 128 so that it perfectly aligns, and we'll hit Shift D Y 128, and then we'll hit Shift R, Shift R, Shift R, just so you repeat the process a few times. Now I like to keep my scene quite tidy, so I'm just going to take these, hold Shift, click on all of these, going to hit M, new collection, instance. So you can increase this camera length if you want. I'm going to make a few duplications of this tunnel. So I'm going to call this one Hex. I'm just going to duplicate it, Shift D. We'll call this one Hex Reflect, and I'll call this one Hex Wireframe. And on my Hex Reflect, I'm going to select that. I'm going to go to modifiers, add a modifier, and we're going to add a simple deform. And you want it to deform on the y-axis, and this is going to create a sort of corkscrew effect. I'm just going to hide this Hex Wireframe for now, and we can angle it 360 degrees. So you have this sort of hexagon corkscrew. I'm just going to bring these back, and I'm going to go onto my Hex Wireframe. I'm going to add a modifier, and I'm going to add a wireframe modifier. We'll just leave that as it is for now. It's not disturbing the scene too much. I will just change some settings on here. I'm going to click on my Hex Reflect. Basically, you can see these wireframes, they're kind of flat. The reason is because we scaled the object along, and we haven't applied the transform settings. So if you look here, it says Y64. Just click on your Hex Wireframe, hit Control A, apply all transforms, and now that's going to apply the scale. So now you should see your wireframes look fine. So I'm going to do that for this one as well. So just hit Control A, apply all transforms, and you'll notice the scaling resets to 0 when you do this. I'm just going to go to my last frame and make sure that it's looping properly. So go to 301, jump back. Basically, you want to make sure that when you jump back to the first frame, the scene looks exactly the same as when it is on the last frame. That's how you make sure you got a perfect loop. So we'll go to 301, hold Shift, hit left arrow, and yeah, looks good. So that should have no problem looping. Let's save what we got. So I'm just gonna save this. We're gonna start shading the scene. So this is always a good checkpoint to save your work. Cool. Let's jump into render mode. So I'm gonna hit Z and then 8. Takes you into render modes. I'm gonna select this light. This light should come with your default scene. If not, you can just add a light, hit Shift A, add a point light. But I'm just gonna use this one. I'm gonna hit Alt G just to reset the location, so it's dead in the center of the scene. Go to the world settings, let's make the world black. I'm just gonna come out of render mode quickly because I wanna add the sun. There's basically a sun that is gonna be at the back of the scene. So I'm gonna hit Shift A, add a mesh. I'm gonna add an icosphere. If you hit the period key, it should take you directly to the object. We're gonna go to this menu here, change the subdivisions to 5, and right click, shade smooth. And let's just scale this up just so it's within the hexagon. Now hit 0. With the icosphere selected, make sure it's not in your tunnel collection, because if it's in your tunnel collection, it's going to populate the whole tunnel. We only want one sun. So just move that into your collection here. We'll rename this sun. Go to the transform settings here. We're going to pull the Y value up so it goes off into the tunnel. We'll put it around here maybe. We might change this later, and hit play. And as you can see, we're getting closer and closer to the sun. We don't want that. We want the sun to be parented to the camera, so the sun follows along with the camera. So it sort of gives you the illusion that the sun is like way in the distance and you're never actually reaching it, but in reality it's just following the same path as the camera. So we'll click on the sun, hold Control, click on the camera, hit Control P, set parent to object keep transform. Now hit play, and it's going to follow with the camera now. So I'm going to save what I've got now. I'm going to go back into render mode, and we're going to add a material to this sun. So Once you parent it to your camera, if you can't find it, you just need to expand the camera now. It's going to be grouped under it. So click on the sun. We'll go to the shader editor, add a new material. We're going to change this to an emission shader. Pump the strength up to like 100, give it a nice bright color. I'm just going to go into my render properties and I'm going to add a few of these. We're using Eevee, by the way. So we're going to add bloom. That's going to give this nice sort of blooming effect coming from the sun. And we're going to add screen space reflections and motion blur. You can add ambient occlusion, but I don't think it's necessary. We're going to go to color management as well. And I like to put this on very high contrast. I'm going to play around with these exposure and gamma settings later down the line. So with that done, let's go back to our material settings. We'll rename this sun. And we'll give it a nice orange glow. Now let's start shading this hex reflect thing. All we're going to do is just drop the roughness all the way down so it's fully reflective, but I am going to bring this down a bit. So bring the color, the base color down to a sort of grayish black. Play with a metallic if you want. See which one you prefer. They are quite similar, to be honest, once you start playing with that base color. I think I'll leave the metallic on. I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to get rid of that light. I don't think you need it. Just hit X, delete. Let's go back to what we had before. So I'm just going to turn the overlays off. I'll hit play. And I want to widen up the camera a bit as well. So I'm just going to bring this out a bit. Like to here. We've still got this wireframe. So you can control the thickness of it. I'm going to turn off even thickness. And I'm going to go to the material settings, add a new material. Call this wireframe, and we'll change this to emission, change that to a nice orange, pump it up to about 50. And you can also add a simple deform on this one as well. Have it before the wireframe as well. You want the simple deform before. Leave it on twist. If you want this sort of lasery effect, you can have it like that. You can play around with that. You can even animate this as well, which is pretty cool. But I was going to have it on the y-axis so you can sort of control it like that. I wouldn't go too mad with it because you see these wireframes, they jump but only for like a couple of frames, and when you render it out it'll probably go too fast. It'll probably blink and it won't look very good. So if you are going to animate it like that, I'd probably be just subtle with it, or you can do it on the Z and have it like that, which I think looks pretty dope. My one went for a more like sort of natural looking sort of sun color, so I just sort of stuck with oranges, but you can mix it up with different colors. For this tutorial, I'm just going to go with the orange. I think I'll leave that for now. You can only go 360 degrees on this. What I want to do, I want to deform it even further, so you can just add another one under it. Sorry, we'll add another simple deform and do it on the y-axis, and you can go even further now, like that. As you can see, I'm just sort of animating that mesh deform there, which is creating that effect. I'm just going to keep it simple, so we'll go on your second deform. We're going to key in an animation of this angle property here. So go to the first frame, apply a keyframe on this one. Go to the last frame, apply the same keyframe so that we're at the same position on our last frame as we are on the start. And then just go to 151, which is directly in the middle. And let's bring this to 0. Or you could bring it all the way back to get original hexagon shape, but I think 0 will look good. So apply keyframe there. Okay, and here's one issue I'm noticing with this. When you come to this point here, see here, it's not joining. The objects are not joining correctly, and I know exactly why that is, so I'm going to fix that now. So let's go back into our solid view. Just save what you got. This is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to delete all these instances, so just don't worry about it. Just everything in this instance group, just delete all these. Here's what we need to do. We're going to click on the hex reflect, and we're going to add a mirror modifier, and we're going to add the mirror modifier on the y-axis. Now if you followed the tutorial to a T and your origin point is here for this reflect object, then the mirror should basically reflect off this origin point. If not, then you need to basically make sure that's where your origin point is. So it would involve you going into edit mode, basically moving the object on the y-axis until it has the origin point on the end. So we're going to add the mirror modifier now, add it on the y-axis, and as you can see, it reflects basically where that origin point is. So now we need to add those instances again, and the reason why I had to delete them is because now that we've added this mirror modifier, it's basically doubled the length of the tunnel. So if we just left it as it was, all the meshes would have been intersecting and it would have looked awful. So, or it could have looked cool. Sometimes you get unexpected results when you fuck around with things. So maybe it did look cool. I don't know. Anyway, just add those instances back. You don't need to. You don't even need to add as many now because obviously it's double the length. So we'll add the tunnel GY256. Just making sure that they're all perfectly joining. I think you only need one now because the sun's blocking the ends, so that looks really bad. It's the mirror modifier. We're mirroring on the X as well, so we don't want that, but it does make some cool patterns actually. I'm going to get rid of that, but it did look quite cool. Right, so that should have fixed that issue now. You can see they perfectly join now, because what it's doing the exact, it's obviously it's mirroring it, so the two ends will perfectly align now as they're rotating. So I'm getting a bit of like flickering from this wireframe just as it intersects through. So just rotate it slightly. I'm going to do it precisely the angle of a hexagon. So if we do 360 divided by 6 times that by 2. Okay, I haven't mirrored the hexagon either, so I'll need to do the same on this. Add a mirror modifier, add that on the Y. That should fix that now. Hold up, something's not right. Oh, that's what it is. Okay, so you know how we extended the length of the tunnel? We need to extend the length of the camera now. Double the camera path. So go back to your camera, change this to, my arithmetic's terrible, so just do 128 times 2. And we'll add a keyframe again, AT linear. Go to the last frame, do that same thing, do the hold shift, right arrow, and just make sure there's no differences in the scene, and it looks pretty good. Just want to render a frame, let's just see how it looks like when it comes out. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I don't really like these lines poking out, see? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on my hex wireframe. I'm going to hit S, Shift Y, again to lock it to the Z and the X axis. You can bring it in a bit if you don't want it to clip. I'm going to hit S, Shift Y again, and I just didn't like the edges that are going along the Y axis. I didn't like them cutting through. I might pump up the thickness on the wireframe modifier as well. You can make it a bit thicker if you want to get those glows to come through. Well, it's pretty much there, so I'm just going to do a few more changes. So I'm going to go over here and I just want to pump up the exposure a bit, I think. Just drop the gamma down as well to about 0.7. Set the exposure to 1 and the gamma to 0.7. Just going to render one frame. Yeah, if you play around with these settings, it should make things pop a lot more. Don't be afraid to mess around with those. You can always go into your object as well and play around with this. If you want to tame those reflections, make it a bit darker, or you can make it really bright. That's horrible. And also you can bring your sun in as well on the y-axis. If you want to bring it closer, you can do that. You don't have to have it there, but I like it a bit further in the distance. I might bring it in a bit, maybe like here. Yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. Just gonna go and render a frame out. Go to the composite in, go to use nodes, drag that out, hit Shift A. We're gonna add a viewer node, so go to output, viewer nodes, just so we can see what's going on. Join those together, hit Shift A, add a lens distortion, pop that there. I always like adding this node. I like the way it sort of separates the RGB around the edges. So I like to add this to these kind of renders. You can see here it sort of trails, and you can see the green sort of edges out. That's what that does. You can see it here as well. Generally, when you're rendering out animations, you should just do an image sequence. Number one, it'll probably be quicker because you haven't got to encode it as well. Your computer hasn't got to encode it at the same time as rendering it. And number two, if your render crashes, when you're doing it in an image sequence, if it crashes, then you can always pick up where you left off with an image sequence. You can't do that when it's encoding at the same time. It will basically corrupt the file and you have to start the render all the way from the start. Not too big an issue when you're doing it at 1080p, but when you start doing like 4K renders or if you're using doing volumetrics and stuff like that, and yeah, you know how that stuff works, it can take a long time to render. So generally best practice to do PNG, but I want to see the animation now, so I'm just gonna do it as FFmpeg video. Container, set that to MP4. Video codec H.264. Output quality perceptually lossless. Just going to save that. Control F12, and that's going to render out the animation. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps me grow the channel. And if you want to support me directly, consider signing up to my Patreon, where you'll gain access to lots of exclusive perks, such as instant access to all of the Blender project files for my tutorials, project files for my weekly VJ loops, which are these designs that I release every week on my website. Alternatively, project files can be purchased individually from my website. I'll be leaving a link in the description below if you would like to check that out. And feel free to browse around my website while you're at it. I upload all sorts of stuff there, loads of free downloads such as VJ loops and music I make as well. If you fancy listening to something different, you can check that out. Once again, that's nedmotion.co.uk.